Hey everyone, welcome back to Tallulah Talks. That is me, and every Wednesday we talk about killers. And today we are going to be discussing a serial killer that was born in Germany. I have never really heard of him until I researched him. I think I googled killers around the world, and his name cropped up, and yeah, um, it was pretty bad. I think he's probably one of the worst that I've probably covered on my channel. So without further ado, we will get on with it. Also, excuse the bird noises. I have a bird. I don't have any other room to film this in. So we're just gonna have to put up with it. Anyway, so the killer that we are talking about today is Joachim Kroll. I don't really know how to pronounce his first name, but that's just how I'm going to pronounce it. So he was born in 1933 during when the Nazis were kind of coming into their power in Germany. And he was the youngest of 8 kids, and because of this, he was considered weak by his family, which is kind of odd. He was constantly bullied from his family, so I think that included like his older siblings and his parents. And he had quite an unstable upbringing, and this is what likely led to his later crimes in life. Plus the fact that he grew up in poverty, and that'll explain some things later on in the video. He was known to be a bedwetter, and this caused him to be constantly humiliated by his family. And he was also sexually abused. Well, it's kind of thought that he was sexually abused because bedwetting that late into childhood, especially when the child later becomes a killer, it is thought that they were sexually abused. Back in, I think it was maybe the 60s, research was brought forward, and a theory was brought forward that bedwetting and animal cruelty were signs of psychopathy, and these things were kind of known as the McDonald triad. But this has later been kind of disproven, because there are other things that are kind of signs of a child growing up to be a psychopath. However, what is constant throughout these psychopathic killers is animal abuse and animal cruelty. Like I said, the family lived in extreme poverty and extreme hunger, especially with 8 children plus 2 adults. Their father was a soldier in the German army, and he is believed to have died during the war, but I don't know if they ever received a letter telling them that their father had died. Kroll then left school in 1948 because he had to continuously repeat grades more than once, and so he kind of just decided to just leave at that point. At 15, he only had a 4th grade education, so that would be like in Scotland and the UK, that would be like primary 4, so like the intelligence of like an 8-year-old. He did struggle in school, and this was thought to also be with the disruptions of the war at that time, because the war went on from, I think it was like 1939 to 1945. He was later tested for his IQ, and it was revealed that he had a very low IQ of 78. And some actually report that Kroll was unable to read. And actually, later on with his crimes and why he wasn't caught for so long is because the police actually believed whoever the killer was had a very high IQ, because he constantly moved around when he was killing, and his killings actually differed from each other as well. There was only a few that were similar, and so that led police to believe there were different killers. So for the psychological analysis of Joachim Kroll, because that's what I kind of like to look into, is the psychology of these killers. So like I said, the idea was brought forward of this McDonald triad, where there were 3 signs that researchers believed in childhood would lead that person to become a killer in the future, or it could indicate whether they'd be a killer. And I think he had 2 of these. I don't think he had the arson, but he was known to be abusive to animals and to kill them, and he was known to be a bedwetter as well. And so there was an article published by J.M. MacDonald in 1963 citing the earlier research showed a correlation between these behaviours and then violence in adulthood. Like I said, this has been disproven since then, but from serial killers, what is consistent is the fact that they are usually almost always cruel to animals. With the animal cruelty, this usually happened, or was thought to happen, when the child was being abused within their home or within school, and when they were being humiliated. Now, obviously, that's what I said just previously, was that he was bullied by his family and he was humiliated by them quite often. And then what would happen is people like Kroll would take out their frustration on something that they deemed weaker than themselves. The bedwetting again was thought to be linked to feelings of humiliation. The child feels helpless, and then this contributes to more bedwetting. Again, it has been disproven, but animal cruelty, that tends to always lead to someone ends up being a killer. Moving on to the killings, I believe he killed 13 people. That is what he confessed to. Excuse me, when working on a farm, Kroll stated in later interviews that killing animals then inspired this fantasy within him to then move on to people. And he stated that when he saw a pig being slaughtered, or when he was doing it himself, this woke up a sexual drive in him. As a young man, Kroll did attempt to have relationships with women, but he said that he felt really awkward and inadequate, and that women would maybe laugh at him, and again he would have this feeling of humiliation. So he only had 1 sexual encounter with a woman, and he described it as a failure. It didn't say what part of it had failed for him. It was just that it was a failure in his eyes. He concluded then that he should have sexual encounters with, quote unquote, someone who couldn't complain about performance, end quote. In 1955, after his mum died, this obsession with death then grew. He went his separate ways with his siblings. I don't think they ever kept in touch after this. And then this led Kroll to killing his first victim later that same year. So February 8th, 1955, Kroll travelled to the village of Wallstedel and captured and killed Irmgard Strell, who was 19. I don't know if it was a boy or a girl, because the names are like German and they're hard to determine whether it's a boy or a girl, and the pictures are very hard to determine as well. But this individual was strangled to death, raped, and then was slashed in the abdomen. Strell was actually a runaway and had met Kroll, and then they kind of just walked together until they got to like a wooded area. And Kroll then stabbed this individual in the neck 4 times and then strangled them. The individual was found 5 days later under like a snow-covered road, and police actually suspected more than one person. The second victim was, which I believe he confessed to, but he wasn't charged with, was Erika Scholetter, who was 12. She was strangled and raped, but again, he wasn't charged with this due to a lack of evidence, even though he confessed to it. You will find that he killed a lot of his victims in the same way, but sometimes he would just strangle them. Other times he would strangle and drown them. Other times he would strangle and stab them. It was different for every couple of victims, which made it harder for him to be caught. After raping these victims, which he only raped some of them, he didn't rape all of them, Kroll would then masturbate over their bodies, and then when he got home, he would pleasure himself with a sex doll while at the same time choking a small child doll. And I think he really did have an obsession with killing and raping children, because a lot of his victims were between the ages of probably about 5 and like 16. He did have some adult victims, which again, it made him very hard to capture. Police believe that Kroll was responsible for several murders between 1955 and 1959. However, Kroll denied this. He said that after these 2 victims, he took a 4-year break. He stated that he didn't have the urge to kill again until 4 years later, which would make it 1959. June 16th, 1959, Kara Tesmer, 24, which was, I think, was his oldest victim, was murdered in an identical way to Strayer. Oh, God, I can't speak today. This time he would engage in cannibalism, which was his first time engaging in cannibalism. He removed pieces of flesh from her buttocks and her thigh, and then later cooked these. A local man in Rhine, known as Heinrich Ott, was actually arrested for this particular murder. However, when he was waiting to be tried, he actually hanged himself. The next victim was Manuela Knott, who was 16, and she was murdered on the 26th of July 1959. Again, it was similar to Tesmer in the murder, including that the pieces of the buttock and thigh had been removed for Kroll to then cook and eat. The next victim was only 12 years old, and her name was Barbara Bruder. However, her body was never found, but Kroll did admit to killing her. He did mainly kill women and girls, and he didn't stick to one age group or type like other serial killers. So again, this is how other serial killers had been caught, as they had the same MO every single time. The victims would be killed in the same way. They would maybe leave tokens. They would probably maybe be killed in the same area as well. Whereas this is why police thought that Kroll was so smart, because it was different areas. He travelled. The murders were similar but kind of different, and sometimes he would engage in cannibalism, other times he wouldn't. So again, it made it very hard for police to capture him. He did murder one man, Hermann Schmitz, in 1965. And basically what had happened was he saw this couple engaging in sex in a car in like an abandoned parking lot, I guess. He then lured Schmitz out of the car by waving at him for help. He then stabbed Schmitz repeatedly, and he did plan to kill his partner. Schmitz's fiancée, Marion, leapt into the driver's seat and drove straight towards Kroll. However, Kroll dodged this and then just ran away. This then further confused the police because, again, he didn't always engage in cannibalism, meaning he didn't always take the victim's flesh, and making each murder kind of different. He only took flesh that he deemed to be from victims that were deemed young and tender. At the time, several other killers were also at large, and so the police were actually kind of preoccupied with that as well. While Kroll was actively killing, 5 other men were actually arrested and charged with these murders. And like the Otto, one of them did commit suicide while awaiting trial. Later on, Kroll stated that he partook in cannibalism because meat was very expensive at this time. A lot of people were living in poverty. And so, as opposed to other serial killers, they usually did it as a sexual desire. Kroll just did it because meat was very expensive. He had quite a few other victims, which I'm just kind of going to list here. They were Petra Gies, who was 13. She was killed April 23rd, 1962. She was raped, strangled and mutilated. Marika Tefel, who was 12, was killed June 4th, 1962, and she was strangled and raped. Barbara Bruder, 12, she was killed June 12th, 1962, and he actually confessed to her murder, but her body was never found, and so I don't think he was charged with this. And you'll actually find that after kind of like a small spree, so he'd kill 3 or 4 victims within the space of days, weeks and months, but then he would take a break for a couple of years. And so again, this confused police. The next victim was Ursula Ralling, who was 26, so she was his oldest victim, on September 13th, 1966, and she was strangled and raped. The next victim was Iana Hack, who was 5 years old, one of his youngest, and she was killed December 2nd, 1966. She was strangled, raped and drowned. Gabrielle Putman, who was 10, he did attempt to strangle her, but unfortunately someone did catch him in the act, and she escaped and did live, fortunately. Maria Hetgen was 61. Oh my god, that was his oldest victim. Sorry, I totally forgot that. Foggy brain. She was the oldest, sorry, and she was killed July 12th, 1969. She was beat and raped. And again, that was totally different from his other victims because mostly they were strangled or drowned or stabbed. This was the first one that he had beaten. Jutta Ran was 13 and they were killed May 21st, 1970. They were strangled. Karen Topfer was 10 and she was killed May 8th, 1976. She was strangled and raped. And the last victim that he ever killed was Marion Kettner, who was 4. She was killed July 3rd, 1976, and she was strangled. And her body was actually in the process of being cooked when Kroll was arrested. So moving on to the arrest. Like I said, July 3rd, 1976, Kroll kidnapped 4-year-old Marion Kettner from a park. Later on, a neighbour had asked Kroll about the smell and the clogging of the shared toilet that the apartment used, and he replied like, oh, it's guts blocking that. And the neighbour kind of laughed, like thinking this was a joke, but then they kind of looked and actually saw that there was organs in the toilet, and then immediately contacted the police. Once police were inside Kroll's apartment, they found a young girl's dismembered body, which I believe was Marion. And they then found a hand that was cooking on the stove with entrails clogging the plumbing. The police then removed the shared toilet and found kidneys, lungs, livers, and heart. Kroll was immediately arrested and he point blank on the spot admitted to the murder of Kettner, the young girl. He gave police details of 13 other murders and confessed to partaking in cannibalism. Now, Kroll, he obviously knew that what he was doing was very wrong, because he actually was very cooperative with police. However, he believed that he would get some type of surgery that would stop his need to partake in cannibalism and to kill people. However, that wasn't the case, and it kind of just goes to show how low his IQ really was. After years of being incarcerated, I think it was probably about 4 years of incarceration, he was then charged with 8 murders and 1 attempted murder, and the trial lasted 151 days. Now, he like I said, he did confess to 13 murders. However, due to a lack of evidence, he was only charged with 8 murders and obviously the attempted murder of the 10-year-old girl. He was sentenced to life imprisonment on April 1982, and he died in 1991 of a heart attack at the age of 58. And that is the disturbing and shocking story of Joachim Kroll. Like I said, he did have a very low IQ of 78. However, he was kind of smart enough to move to in different places, kill in different areas, and kill in different ways. And a different age range as well. You know, like the age range went from about 4 years old to 61 years old. And generally, serial killers stick to the same MO time and time again. And again, that is what made it so difficult for police to capture him. And that is why it is believed that he did have a high IQ. Unfortunately, because of the childhood trauma and bullying that he went through and the low IQ, it's believed that this is what led him into murdering his victims. If this is the kind of content you enjoy, definitely hit that subscribe button. Every Wednesday I do Killer Wednesday, and every Saturday I am here for Saturday's Haunting Hour. If you have any stories of killers that you would like me to look into, please leave them in the comments. I always love to learn about different killers and how they got to where they were and why they killed. I like to look into the psychological explanations. Thank you for watching, and I will see you on Saturday.